So let me welcome everyone, both here at Bruegel and also our online audience, on our discussion on the Recovery and Resilience Facility. So as all of you know, in 2020, when the pandemic hit Europe, there was a very bold decision to create Next Generation EU, which was the first European Union program to finance expenditures from borrowing. It was on time, sizable, and I think it had a major positive impact on the perceptions of how the crisis will play out. It took some time to put it into legislation and then to start it. But nevertheless, we have reached the halftime, and the European Commission issued recently a midterm evaluation, which was also supported by an independent review of a consortium of several institutions. Some of their representatives are also here, and they are very much welcome. And this midterm review was rather positive, if I'm right. I think Geraldine will speak about that. It raised some issues on the administrative burden, but I think in general the tone was very, very positive. So the aim of our discussion today is partly to learn from this midterm review, but also partly to go beyond it and in particular discuss if anything is missing from the midterm review, and also whether there are also some features of the RF which could have been improved or which could be improved in the remaining lifetime or in the future if we will have similar programs at the EU level. So after this brief introduction, let me just quickly introduce our three really distinguished speakers, and we are very grateful for you to come. So in alphabetic order, Professor Tito Boeri, who is the head of the economics department at Bocconi University. Then Geraldine Mailleux, the director for investment growth and structural reforms at DG ECFIN of the European Commission. And I think you had a major role both in the design of the RF and its negotiations and the later evaluation. And Laurent Maurin, who is the head of the Economics Studies Division at the European Investment Bank. And recently the EIB report provided very interesting analysis of the Recovery and Resilience Facility. So I suggest we go more from the official towards the independent view. So I ask Geraldine to kickstart this event. So Geraldine, the floor is yours.
So as you probably know, we have and had some slides, so maybe if they can be put on. Only two slides, basically, to keep it short. So the RF was created in 2020 and then adopted in 2021. And in the regulation, it is foreseen that there will be a midterm evaluation of the facility. So clearly, so we had to do it, and we have done it. We have published it on the 21st of February. Of this year. Now, it's important to note before anything that it's too early, clearly, to assess the full impact of the facility. We had that mid-term, indeed, middle, but at the same time, the first year was essentially spent in preparing the plan. So in earnest, the implementation is also kickstart a bit later, but in any case, so that we clarify very well in the evaluation that it's only a mid-term evaluation. Now, if you can go. Can even move by myself. So if you go to the key findings, but nevertheless we try to be and to draw an honest assessment of the situation now, looking at where we are, but also what are the pros and cons of the facility, what are the things that have worked well and things that maybe where we see things to be improved. So I think one of the key and important findings of this facility is that it basically, I mean, you have two part of this facility. It's recovery and resilience facility. I think for the recovery part, we have managed and we have shown, so the economic rebound that followed the adoption of the facility has been good. Of course, in economics, we can never make a full link between an event and the other, so we don't know the counterfactual, but clearly what we have seen is that as soon as the facility has been announced, there was a major reduction in spread, for example, so that is clear, and it's really followed the announcement of the Next Generation EU. We have managed to do, thanks to this pre-financing possibility, so to finance a lot of funding immediately. So we had like about 56 or 57 billion just released quickly as pre-financing 21-22, and then another 10 billion has been released for the repower pre-financing. A third, in terms of macro, a third important element is the maintenance of the public investment. So as you know, in the previous crisis, one of the lesson was that because of the shortfall of financing, the first thing that the governments are cutting is public investment. This didn't happen this year and at this time, and this is quite remarkable. And in fact, public investment has increased from 2019 to 2023. It was 3.3 to 3.3%. So, and if you look in our forecast, so between the increase of public investment from 2019 to 2025, half of it will be due to the RRF. So it's a substantial support to in public investment, which is very important. And as a result, we have seen a rebound of the economy that has been quicker than we expected, and unemployment has been maintained quite well. Of course, we cannot say lots of others factor that came, and so other facility, also the ECB role, so we cannot attribute everything to this. But, I mean, in terms of recovery, I think we have managed. We have also some Quest simulation. It's always very difficult to assess what is the impact of such a large increase of investment, but even under less positive assumption, we can have a very significant impact on growth. If we take normal assumption on elasticity, we had an impact of 1.4 percentage points compared to a no positive change, and that's just for the investments. We don't factor in reforms where we know that the impact is very, very large, but it's very difficult to pinpoint to a specific element, so that's why we haven't done it, but we are still working on it. So support for the economic recovery has been there. The second very important finding is that, so this is the first major in EU funding, which is what we call performance-based. So we don't usually cohesion funding, we reimburse on the basis of cost, on invoice. And here we have changed the logic, and we reimburse when member states have made progress on the implementation of what they have committed to do, essentially reforms and investment. And this turns out to be really positively seen by all the stakeholders. And as you can see, Francesco, who was part of the independent evaluation that was done, and that's all, and member states have recognized that the fact that we put on the table, so this performance has helped to generate concrete result on the ground. And in particular, so this performance was based on the conditionality related to reform. So this is a very important element. So basically, for member states to have their plan approved, they needed to come up with a package of investment and reforms. These reforms are essentially the CSR, so the country-specific recommendation, and all member states have said that thanks to the RF, this has led to the implementation of long-awaited reform. I mean, you could say, and I guess we will have this debate, yeah, this reform would have happened anyway. Well, in economics, we never know what will have happened if we hadn't done it. But if we look at the implementation of CSRs in the past compared to what has happened now, I mean, we have a major increase on the implementation of CSR. So that shows that there was an impact. And it's always easy to say it was in my government plan, but it's much more difficult to implement it in concrete. And I think the fact that we have used this funding at EU level to on the condition of the implementation of reform is really novel and has led to really important results. So we have lots of results on the ground. I don't want to give loads of examples, but for example, just one, the implementation of the Spanish labor market reform. It's a remarkable reform, very large reform. So that has happened thanks to the RF. For example, in France, we have 750,000 households that have already received subsidies, for example, for energy. So it's just to give two numbers. The other important element is the strong alignment between the EU policies and the facility, because the facility has really enshrined in its requirement that you need to finance a certain amount of green transition and digital transition, and in retrospect it was very, very good foresight, because then it allowed us to add the repower, and so, but we had really a focus on investment of facilitating the green and digital transition, and that's a very important element. The other element is also the ownership of the member states. So the facility is built in a way that member states put themselves, have a menu of reforms, which are the CSR that they need to address, but they themselves propose these, the ones that they want to address, they themselves propose how they want to address these reforms. And they themselves put forward what we call the milestones and target, which are the element that we check. And so member states have recognized that it has led to some ownership, so that, which is a very much of a difference compared to adjustment program, for example, where we had seen a lot of reversal after the program finished because there was no ownership. And here, member states are owning this, and some member states have even included the financing of the RF in a bigger scheme. For example, France Relance has, so the RF financing is part of the plan de relance of France. So that's very important. And then last element that I want to stress is on positive, is the agility of the RF. We have managed to, I mean, the RF was built to get out of one crisis, the COVID, but after that we got clearly a huge increase in the energy price, the invasion of Ukraine. So all this was also major shock, and we managed to allow change in the plan to face these new circumstances. For example, member states could change their plan to, if they could argue that there was a lot of inflation, much more than was expected, or that because of supply chain they couldn't deliver, so they could change their plan. And also we have added the repower, so adding additional firepower to try to help member states to get out of their dependency from basically the gas from Russia. So that, I think, is on the positive side. Now, on the things that where we see rooms for improvement, or at least stakeholders see room for improvement, the first one is the administrative burden. So many member states said, we haven't seen the simplification that we expected. So member states are particularly complaining, saying that that we have demanding audit and control requirement, that it's a lot of information, the extent of information that is required to justifying the milestones and target, they consider to be heavy. And they also complain about the reporting requirements. So here, we need to look into this, but at the same time, it's important to just take also a bit of a distance to that. I mean, and we need to ensure that there is a balance between, on the one hand, the administrative burden, but also, I mean, the protection of the financial interests of the Union. We should remember the amount of funding that we are releasing, and that cannot be just given without appropriate checks. And I think that to some extent, some member states were also under a wrong impression that they would not have to show some proof before getting their money, in particular member states that are large member states and member states that are also not used to get funding from the EU. So there was a bit surprise that we would ask for proof, but it's not because you say you have done it that you have done it, and we have to check. So to some extent, we have to keep that in mind. The second element is that member states complain that they would want something simpler and more flexible. So that's also an important element that has been mentioned. And what they criticize in particular is the fact that we have, under each installment to be paid, we have milestones and target. And then if a member state do not manage to fulfill all the milestones and target, then the payment is delayed, or you have a partial suspension, which is possible, but member states do not like it because they consider it to be a negative signal. And then they also complain to some extent that we are having a literal interpretation of all these requirements. But at the same time, it's important that we also keep in mind that there is a trade-off again between being, an accountability that the Commission has vis-à-vis the European Court of Auditor, vis-à-vis the Parliament, vis-à-vis the Council, and at the same time having some flexibility. So here we need to pay attention to that. Stakeholders have also complained that we don't involve enough the regional and local authorities. There was a requirement indeed to include that the member states should explain how they have consulted the stakeholder and how they have taken into account their point of view. But it was not a criteria, so we couldn't impose this. We could just check that the member state have done it. And so some member states consider that this was not sufficient, which we have tried to encourage member states to do it, but it's not necessarily easy. And the last important lesson is this, the administrative capacity. So clearly, that is still a bottleneck. To manage a large amount of funds, we see that in some member states, particular, the one that has already administrative capacity problem for absorbing the cohesion funding, they have the same problem there, and it is particularly at the local level that is the most striking, and so that we are trying to look into this. Last word before concluding, what is very important is that we shouldn't make a link between the administrative burden and what is called the slow absorption. First of all, I don't think there is slow absorption. Yes, there was delay in the implementation compared to the initial plan, but they were essentially due to the fact that we have asked member states, we allow member states to get more money, to get additional funding from Repower. And so member states had to prepare their plan, revise their plan to do that, and that absorbs time. And so they took this opportunity of revising their plan to also change other elements, and so that led to some postponement of the payment request. But that didn't mean that the implementation didn't continue. This continued on the ground, and the proof is that now we have caught up really significantly. So we have already disbursed 235 billion euro, which is far from nothing. If you compare for any track record of any other EU funding, we will never manage this, and we are going to continue. And we have 16 payment requests ongoing. So we expect that by the end of the year, close to 300 billion would have been delivered. So compared to where we plan to be, it's a bit less, but it's still, I think, quite remarkable, and it's very difficult to plan ahead. But what is important is that the slowdown that we can see, some member states have yet not received any funding, but that is not related to the administrative burden. This is because these member states have not done the reform that they were committed to do. So that is why. So we have also to be clear that when we do a performance-based instrument, that means that we condition the money on the fact that you have to do reforms and investment. If you don't do your reform, we don't pay. And that is an important element, and it's a consequence. But as such, it's not a bad thing. It's rather a good thing. We have also a lot of condition on the quality of the audit and control milestones. Some member states have still not received the funding, partly because of that, because the control system is not good enough to ensure that we have assurance that the protection of the financial interest of the Union is done. So as a conclusion, just to say that I think that we think that we have 3 years have passed. We are the midterm, but we have still a lot of progress to be done, and now what we push member states to do is to focus really on the implementation to make sure that this is finished by 26. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, Geraldine, for this introduction, highlighting many positives and also some things to improve. In fact, you answered already one of the questions which was raised online about the slower implementation than planned. And also let me encourage all our online participants to ask questions. So go to Slido and write #RRF. Ask your question. I will monitor it and ask. I would have a question to you on the performance-based nature, but let me defer that after Laurent and Tito already had a chance to give their initial remarks. So Laurent, the floor is yours.
A quick presentation. I'm going to make it in less than 6 minutes. Can you hear me? Yeah, it's okay now. So can I have I'm Laurent Morin. I come from the European Investment Bank, and I'm going to present you some findings of the EIB investment report related to the RRF. And basically what I'm going to do is that I'm going to support what Geraldine just said before, and maybe open also to the private sector involvement into the transformation of the European economy. There is still an echo. So I will have 3 points. I will be rather quick. So far, so good. And as Geraldine said, the RRF supported a strong recovery of the European economy. Then there are challenges ahead, and one of them is the slow delivery of the RRF. But Geraldine mentioned this. I'm not going to elaborate further. And the learning is about the need to involve the private sector and to leverage on it to really operate the transformation of the European economy. Government investment to finance government consumption or transfer and aids expenditures is there, as you can see on the chart on the middle. It happened during the energy crisis, but given the size of the RRF as a share of public investment, it cushioned public investment so far, and we expect this effect will last because we need public investment to transform the European economy. Then in terms of delivery, as you can see on the 2 charts on the left, the black is the planned disbursement, the blue is the actual disbursement, or the realized disbursement. And as you can see, we lag behind the schedule because of several reasons that we can discuss later. And finally, what I would like to open the floor to is about the involvement of the private sector and the need to remove bottlenecks for European corporates to invest in the European economy. So as you can see on the chart on the left, structurally, since the GFC, the global financial crisis, there is a gap in terms of investment share in the European Union and the US, with non-residential investment being structurally 1.5 to 2% lower as a share of GDP in Europe compared to the US. And this has a bearing on production, on innovation, export, competitiveness, and all the like, and long-term potential growth also. This can be partly explained by the structural impediments that European corporates face in terms of regulation, in terms of access to skilled labor, sometimes also in some pockets of the financial space, in some jurisdiction through access external finance. And if we were to remove these bottlenecks, which are quite persistent and they have not changed much since the RRF across corporates, this is based on our survey, the IB investment survey. If we were to remove some of these impediments, we have estimates showing that we could unlock a substantial portion of investment to modernize and transform the European economy. So with this, I end. My main message is that RRF is a success story so far. Let's hope it lasts. There is some evidence, I didn't show this, but there is some, but we would like to see more evidence that it catalyzes private investment. And this is very important because public investment cannot do all, and we need to rely more on private source to transform the European economy. Thank you. Sorry for the... May I give you the floor? I hope you are successful.
Thank you very much. Now let's move quickly to Tito, please.
Well, first of all, let me thank you for this invitation. I think this debate is very timely as we are halfway through. And I think that at this stage we clearly cannot afford to be celebrative. Let me say that I've been working on this issue together with Roberto Perotti, and looking at the Italian national plan. And this is also the title of our book that analyzes the state of play in this respect. We notice a disconnect between what is being said in public and what is being said in private. To work on this, we talked to a lot of people involved in the implementation of the plan. And while in private we were extremely critical and pointing out a lot of problems arising in implementation, in public they were denying all of this and even challenging our criticism. I don't think that this is a good thing from a standpoint of a public debate. Given that we have 3 years to go, we have to be really take into account all of the problems that are coming out in the implementation of the national plans. Let me say first that I think that the RRF is a good idea, and I'm saying this not only from the standpoint of an academic economist who has been always thinking that we should strengthen fiscal coordination at the European level, but also from the standpoint of someone who had some experience in the public administration. I think For the public administration, it's very good to move to a planning based on milestones, on targets, to account and performance rate. All of these things are extremely good. This being said, I think that there are a number of problems in the design, and they came out very clearly. Clearly what I will say is refer to the Italian situation, but I think that is important also for the rest, and not only because the Italian plan is about 1/3 of the total amount being allotted to this. I wish the problem were only related to delays in the implementation. This is not the case. There are more serious problems, and the real risk is to have a waste of resources. And I think on that we should really think very hard. Let me list the main problems. There are 6 problems, main problems. First, the fact that the initial haste, the fact that government were pressed to write these plans very quickly, had also led to a number of mistakes, and clearly there was no account, it was not taken into account the administrative capacity of countries, especially since the plan is very much involving public investment rather than simply transfers. Secondly, the link between reforms and investment is very poorly defined. There is actually quite a very tenuous link between the two dimensions, and we are making very little progress in reforms, which were supposed to be the key thing about these plans. Thirdly, I think we have been working on very unrealistic estimates of impact of a reform, and still we are working under this assumption, and I don't think this is good for the standpoint of the public debate and the transparency. Fourth, I think there is a problem of the fact that clearly by design and by this is a one-off tool, and however this public investment leaves a stream of maintenance costs later on, and that may reduce incentive, especially for local administration, to carry out this investment. Fifth, there are allocative constraints that are imposed by the Commission, and that prevents that governments sometimes become owners of this plan. So there is an issue of ownership there, and clearly that is present and may reduce the involvement and the way government pursue these plans. And finally, and this is not really the last thing in terms of importance, the least important thing is there is a very serious problem of monitoring. We don't have a clear idea what we are doing with this money at this stage, not only in Italy, but I believe also elsewhere. So let me just give you, the rest of my talk will be simply giving you examples along these 6 points here. Effect of haste. In Italy, we finance with the RRF the super bonus, which is something which is the craziest measure of the last decade. The fact that we paid for restructuring of housing more than what was spent by people. So 110% support, incentive, subsidy. And here we are paying the cost of this. It was the amount of money that was spent on this scheme is greater than the total amount of the Italian RPP. Secondly, things that were done so quickly that there were some simple calculation were done with mistakes. There is a plan for scholarship, and you just have to multiply the number of scholarship by the amount of the scholarship, and you get a different number than was written in the plan. So clearly haste. There is no other explanation for this. Link between reform and investment were very, there was a kind of teleological approach to this plan. So given we need to do this, and therefore it must be right. This is not the way to take. These reforms are extremely difficult. We have been trying to do this reform for a long time. We didn't succeed. The reason is that there is a very strong political opposition. So perhaps may think about using part of the money to buy consensus, to win the opposition of those opposing the reforms. But we need to face this opposition. We cannot think that there is no longer the opposition, and just by saying to government, you will get money only if you do the reform, that we can overcome this type of constraints. This is what happened in Italy with the reform of civil justice, where the opposition of the head of tribunals was so strong that things have been blocked. And similar issues arose in the case of the school reform, especially in the career of the teachers, where the union was very strongly opposing any performance-related approach. So that are things that should be addressed. It's not, so we need to work on this. It's not something that should be left for to national governments or something that is of minor importance. Also, the estimate of impact were clearly unrealistic. In the Italian budget plans, there are these numbers that are ridiculous in my view. An increase of 28 billion per year of the reform of the civil justice from now onward, not only during the duration of the plan, but for always. Similar things concerning reforms of the active labor market policies and so on and so forth. So I think that this is not the right way. I mean, we have clearly to be realistic also in estimating the impact. The fact that we did not consider the fact that one-off measure leaves a stream of maintenance costs. This was a serious problem in the implementation of a very important plan in Italy, which deserved and a very important thing, which is the one of increasing the attendance, the enrollment in preschools, which would be a very powerful way to increase also participation of women to the labor market. Local government didn't do the investment required because they were concerned that after doing the investment and creating the preschool, they would have to finance the preschool, the functioning of the schools. And clearly this problem of one-off versus maintenance cost is not a minor one. Ownership and allocative constraints, there were these quotas to spending that sometimes led to distortion and bad spending. We visited schools where they got the money and they decided to give iPad to students age 4 to 7, while I think that they are at this stage overexposed to digital communication, and they need other things to do sport activities rather than being, and also, some of the documents, given that they had to spend all this money in digitalization, we're talking about very strange things, and we're just making examples here. And finally, monitoring. This is a very serious issue. I don't think that right now in Italy anybody has a clear picture of what has been spent. The government itself, when revising the plans, decided to cancel some programs without taking into account that some of the local governments had already in a way completed some bidding procedure and had already decided the winners, and so there will be controversial issues that will come out of this and may lead to long-standing problems in implementation. So I think that also monitoring such a huge plan is a serious problem. So all this being said, I think that at this stage we really have to think hard how to improve along these lines and perhaps get more time to do it, because if you want, the key thing is to spend well this money. It's not the one of being late in spending, in my view, because the initial mistake was to think that it was possible to spend all of this amount of money largely in public investment in such a short period of time.
Thank you very much, Tito, for these very critical remarks, which are always very much appreciated. Now let me have a quick follow-up question to you, because I let Geraldine and Laurent, if you would like to respond. So basically two questions. So one is that these problems you highlighted, how specific it is, how specific these are to the RRF, namely that a lot of money came suddenly, and how it reflects just a more general inefficiency of the Italian public administration feature. And the second one is how to fix it. So you said we should think hard how to fix this problem. So is it a way to fix it in the remaining lifetime of the RF? Or what else to do if there will be a similar program after 2026?
Well, I think certainly there are inefficiencies of Italian public administration. I'm not denying this, but I think that even a very efficient administration would not be in a position to implement such a huge plan and spend all of its money in such a short period of time. So there is a problem clearly of administrative capacity at all levels. Even the very efficient administration wouldn't be able to do this. So the time is too short for this amount of money, especially if it is clearly, we are not talking about transfers. You know, to spend money in transfer is easy. You just have the right line of a text in a law. But to spend all of this money in public investment is something that takes, especially if you want to spend well, and this is what we want to do in this case. And we knew already this from the experience of the structural funds. I mean, that was clear from the start, in my view. So I think that there are clearly certainly specificities related to Italy. Unfortunately, you know, the problem of monitoring is also related to our little knowledge about what is happening in the other countries. So I don't know exactly what is going on in many other conditions, but I believe that similar problems are present also elsewhere. In terms of the remedies, I think more time, certainly. In my view, I don't think we have to have this negative view about current spending vis-à-vis capital spending. I think that's a mistake. There is good current spending. For instance, in Italy, a key thing would have been to improve the hiring in the public administration. This is what we badly need there. To improve the public administration in Italy, we need to get better people into the public administration. I know this from my personal experience in the Italian Social Security administration. It changes completely the picture. But we were not in a position to use the funds to do that because we could only provide temporary contracts. And you know, the attraction for people in the public sector is employment security. It's not wages. It's employment security. But if we can give only fixed-term contract to people, we won't get the right people. And indeed, the people who were hired, after a while, they left the places where we were hired with the plan and go to our administration where we are offered the open-ended contract, because that's the attraction of a public administration. So where we need people, like in the civil justice reform or in schools and in hospitals and so on, we were not able to attract the right people, and that I think has been, so along these lines some remedies should be found in my view.
Geraldine, would you like to respond?
Yeah, there are many things I want to say. We don't have time for all of it. So maybe a few. Haste and what you say is that it's a lot of money. So first of all, I mean, Italy is a case. I mean, this is the largest of all, so it's probably not representative of what is happening in other countries. And also, Italy combined not only the grant but the loan, and they took the maximum that could, which, well, they decided, but it was not necessarily meant to.
Why the Commission didn't tell Italy you don't want to? I mean, we had the government that. I don't know, was greed or whatever, but you know, one should have said, listen, you have such a high debt. The Commission has always been saying to Italy, you have a high debt. So I was expecting a bit some word of warning, Italian getting all of this money as loans at that stage.
Yeah. Okay. No, what is first, there is a difference between grant and loan, and I agree with you, but I wouldn't want to make too specific to Italy, but to some extent there is maybe also value in loans in the extent that it's increase the potential of the economy. So that depends on what. So as such, it's not because you have a high debt that you shouldn't borrow, but you should be prudent in terms of borrowing for things that will improve your performance. This was the aim of it. So now we may be critical on the implementation, but I think as such, it's not because, but we had, like in our guidance, clearly said that, and we have paid attention to that, and also in other countries, that if member states borrow, that is even more important, that is growth enhancing. On the so you mentioned this link between investment and reform is poorly defined. I think I would disagree with you. That is a key elements of the facility, and that I think in many countries it has helped to, because if you do investment only, sometimes to make the investment sustainable, you need the associated reform. For example, in the green transition, I mean, you can just think about putting a lot of money on renewable. If you don't change the permitting and the licensing thing, it doesn't work. So there is a lot of elements where the combination of reform and investment is very important. And generally, what is also true is that the price, that we gave to, the estimated cost was based on investment, but we condition also on reforms, and that's an important element, and that has led to some leverage. You can say that it's not enough. Maybe, yes, you have opposition, and the opposition will stay. Sure, that the government needs to do its work anyway, but I think that putting money on the table has focused the mind and has led to some achievement, whether we like it or not. On the estimated impact, our estimation is not the same as the government. Yes, government were supposed to make an estimation. Some of them will not qualify, seems to be on the high side indeed. But we have our own model, which were much more conservative than many of these estimates. I don't remember for the case of Italy in particular, but I know that at least the estimate of some reforms were on the very high level, and so we have a different estimation. On the monitoring, if you compare with any other funds that the Commission is managing, we know much more what we are doing, what the member states are doing. We basically know every single milestones and target, and we know where the government is and what they have done. So if, for example, they need to build a hospital, you know whether the hospital has been half built or is built. If you need to do a solar panel, we know whether they have been done or not. If you do a reform, we know that the reform has been done. We check all these evidence to make sure the reform is passed. So I think we know a lot. Now, what we don't know is what is the final recipients of the fund, indeed, because when we get the evidence that it has been done, but we don't know, we don't follow the money. But it's an intrinsic feature of a facility where it's not linked to cost. But I think that doesn't mean that we don't know, and we know much more. Maybe we don't know enough, you would say, but we know much more than we know in other funds like cohesion policy, where it's share management, and we know ex post, but we don't know necessarily a lot ex ante or as we are planning. And maybe the last point is on this one-off character and the limitation in terms of time. That is intrinsically linked to the legal basis that we had. So it's a legal basis, Article 122, which is a legal basis that can only be used in case of emergency. So this is clear that there was a limitation in terms of we needed to link it to the crisis, and so there was a limitation in terms of the time. Now, there are several that are talking already about extending the timeline of the facility. What the Commission is saying is that if you want to do this, you need to change the own resource decision, because you need to be able to borrow for longer, and to be able to borrow for longer, you need to have like an increase in the way we have borrowed, which means the headroom of the budget, so meaning the difference between what the member states are paying effectively and the one they are ready to pay. And so if you don't change the own resource decision, you cannot extend. And changing the own resource decision is unanimity. So that's going to be extremely difficult to do. Plus, you need to change the RF and the URI. So, but that and at this stage, we don't think it's a good idea in any way to start this debate, because what member states need to do is to focus on the implementation of what they have to do for the moment, so that we cannot just extend it at this stage. And the one-off, normally, the philosophy was to finance investment, and investment are by definition one-off. No, it's true that in some cases there were some temporary high, but then indeed you are not supposed, and normally member states were not supposed to use the funding from the RF to finance a long-term contract, but we knew that the money will be only lost. And normally, and I haven't supervised all of the negotiation of each plan, but the line that we had was really to say that if member state wants to finance something that is long-term, they need to ensure that there is additional government financing on top of that. But okay, maybe in the Italian case, some of this was not done, but generally this was the idea.
Thank you very much. You also answered some of the questions which came online. But since the time is running, let me open the floor. Please raise your hands if you would like, so that I can see how many. So many. Okay, so everyone will have less than a minute.
And we'll be have time to...
Yes, Tito have to leave at 2, so for sure.
Greg Burton, I'm with the U.S. mission to the EU. My question is simple, not the December period, but going forward, how do you see Hungary's participation and their ability to execute the program and meet the benchmarks?
Okay, two questions for Geraldine and one for Tito. So Geraldine, you sort of were a little casual in your presentation by saying it's obvious that we have seen some great reforms, but do you actually have some evidence that the implementation was much better than the CSR implementation in the past? And if so, why didn't you show it? And then the other question is, could you not solve this problem of, you know, on the one hand, trying to incentivize reforms by putting a lot of money in the window, on the other hand, allowing that money to be well spent by dispersing once a reform has happened, but basically allowing or even encouraging governments to take their time in how exactly that money is spent. So that would not require an own resources decision. And then my question to Tito is, are you not sort of overstating this case that reforms were picked unrealistically? Because in some cases, you know, the political economy is so difficult that even putting a lot of money on the table does not lead to that reform. The worst that can happen in that case is there's no disbursement, which, you know, as you put it, would actually be a blessing because the money is wasted anyway, right? So I don't think you can sort of have it both ways, right? Right.
Thank you very much. I'm from the European Parliamentary Research Service, Magdalena Sapała. I have two short questions. First is, was it too much in too short time? Also in the context of the loans that have not been consumed all offered. And the second question is, have we used enough experience from cohesion policy? Sometimes I have an impression that we are reinventing the wheel with the RRF. The instrument is so innovative that we actually didn't take into account several very important lessons from cohesion policy, especially in terms of control, partnership principle, and overall absorption capacity in the member states. Thank you.
Yes, Francesco Corti, Belgian federal government. I have a quick question. A lot of the criticism on the Italian RRF, and I've been studying quite a lot, as you can imagine, refers to the drafting process. Now, we cannot go back. Now, if I look at it from a Belgian perspective, the problem we have now, what we can improve concretely over the years to come, what are the simplifications that we can still put in place, in light of what also Geraldine has said, that some administrative burden can be absolutely resolved without changing the regulation. And so the question is, shall we just re-question? Well, the eco-bonus in Italy is a disaster. So shall we refocus on re-changing the plans, or shall we focus, give priority more now on how we can simplify the implementation? Question mark.
Yes, thank you for the presentations. I'm Yuri van Loon from the Permanent Representation of the Netherlands. Indeed, different views and different interpretations on the RRF as an instrument. We hear also now a lot of enthusiasm about the performance-based nature of the instrument, and also perhaps looking forward in the next MFF. There are in the Brussels circus some discussions on this. And I wanted to know, given the experience and the evaluations, what are criteria then for success also in the long term? So apart from, of course, the RRF as an instrument, but also how can we use some of the lessons, even though perhaps it's a bit premature, but how can we think along in the future on this? Thank you.
So thank you very much. Is there another one? Tanis, Lucio, please. Yeah, the last time, Lucio.
I have a question for Geraldine and one for Tito. The question of Geraldine is about the evaluation of the impact. At the time when the RRF was launched, the Commission produced some I'm speaking on the aggregate, of course, because this was carried out with macroeconometric model, some aggregate evaluation. and I'm focusing on the long-term effect on productivity, because shorter-wise, even the super bonus, which it's I think is a very difficult to justify measure, is still resulting in Italy supporting the investment of the euro area in the last quarter of 2023, as a colleague in charge of forecast was telling me, and then she laughed, of course, because we know what is going to happen afterwards. So the important thing is about productivity. Now, you look at the latest WO of the fund, I mean, it underlines actually trend slowdown in productivity, with Europe doing worse than other countries. So if you were to assess, to place a bet in a Bayesian term, in terms of updating your priors compared to what we expected or was officially expected in terms of long-term supply effect, based on the information that you have now, how would you, which type of answer would you give? The question to Tito... no, the question to Tito is very simple, in a sense. You said you support the RRF. Well, from an Italian point of view, if there is money coming, in a sense, is a good thing. But from the point of view of EU public good, much of these things may be good or bad. I mean, the tablet to the children probably are not a great way of spending money. But why the EU should spend on that? So what is the EU public good dimension of much of what is covered by the RRF?
Thank you, very good question. So Tito, the floor is yours.
Well,
you have to leave, Geraldine, kindly agree to leave.
All very
stay a
good
little
questions,
longer.
and also thanks, Geraldine, for reacting to my comments. Very quickly, yes, I think it's too much with too little time. That's the key problem that arose. Reforms, well, I believe that reforms are badly needed. I didn't say that reforms were not needed. I simply said that we should not have a teleological approach. So the fact that they are needed doesn't mean that they will be done, for sure. And I don't think that at least we can get the consolation that we are not going to spend money, because the reform don't cost anything. In the Italian plan, the reform costs 6 billion out of 200 billion. So there, also there was really no cost for these reforms, and yet they also projected to have an amazing impact on the economy. So we are not going to save out of the fact that we don't do the reform, and this I would have hoped to do the reforms to a large extent. Monitoring. I think the Commission should press governments to monitor more closely and to tell, because that's very important also from the standpoint of the efficiency of the plan, and to avoid any misuse of the funds. The fact that I tell you, in Italy, which is the largest beneficiary of the scheme, we don't know anything about the level of spending, exact level of spending on this plan and what is being done. And the final recipient is not a minor issue, who's getting the money at the end. On the drafting, I think both things should be done. There should be a redrafting to some extent, because some components of a plan clearly are infeasible, and they are not needed, and governments don't seem to be a thing. In Italy, the whole thing started during the pandemic, and there was this idea of spending on health system. We have a problem of demographic decline, and all of these issues are very important, and very little is allotted to this, and we have all of these things on digitalization and so on that perhaps are not so important, and governments do not own. If you look at the programs of the parties for the Italian election, they were completely far away from what was written in the plan. So that also gives you an idea of the fact that perhaps the right priorities, what citizens think are important. Italians think that health is the key issue now. It's way more important than any other thing. The EU public good is a long discussion we could possibly have, but there are also components of a type, and talking about health, certainly this is one of the cases, and where we learn also through the pandemic how important it is to have good health system everywhere in Europe. But it would take too long to go through this very interesting question that Lucio you asked.
Thank you very much. Then maybe Geraldine.
Okay, no, thanks a lot. Lots of questions on Hungary. I mean, So the plan has started, is being implemented, but they haven't been paid because they have 27 what we call audit and control milestones. So these are elements that we have added to the plan in the beginning to make sure that the money is well spent. And so then as long as the system is not fixed, we don't feel confident in providing funding, and so they are still in the making. So that's why they haven't received any funding, but some of the investment are being implemented under their own fund, and then they will get the money afterwards. So we are still confident that they will make it, but okay, it takes quite some time. On your question, Jérôme, so evidence of progress, yes, we do. I mean, of course, it's always a bit of a judgment, but if you look at the increase of implementation of the CSR between 19 and 2022, you have increased by 17 percentage points. That compares to, I think, we did and this is in the evaluation, it was 6 before. So you have really much faster implementation. Of course, it's based on our own evaluation, but we have evidence that this is the case. So now, why don't you ask to do the reform and take time? The regulation says that any milestones and target needs to be met by August 2026. So any milestones and target would need to be met now. That doesn't mean that the reform or the investment is necessarily complete, but the stage of, the milestone that we measure or the target needs to have been completed. Now, what we are doing to some extent is that in some cases we have allowed the build of the financial instrument. So if the member state wants to use, and this is the case, for example, in the Spanish plan, where we consider that the setting up of the structure of investment, of this financial scheme, is done before 26, and the money can be spent afterward and needs to be recycled. So that is a way, in a sort of way, to prolong a bit, but we cannot do it to a large extent either. But I think these deadlines were linked to the legal basis, so we had to make it. And then from a financial point of view, I don't think that we can decide not to change their own resource decision, and then so we borrow everything by 26 and then pay only after that. So that is going to be extremely costly. So that I don't think so either we change and we allow for borrowing 1 or 2 more years, and then we spend 2 more years, but otherwise it's going to be costly. A thing on the lessons of cohesion policy, no, we've taken them into account. So, for example, the control system, we've relied, first of all, on many member states could rely on the control system of the managing authority if they wanted to. They can set up the system they want. We also are very much in touch with the control authority, the DAC, so which is the Audit and Control Authority of the Commission, for the cohesion, to make sure that we are exchanging our papers and so that we exchange completely. So I think this is not a problem. The partnership principle, this is very much, inspiring the fact that we have asked the authorities to tell us in their plan how they have consulted stakeholders, but we didn't make it a binding constraint because of the timing, and it takes time. And so we felt that maybe this was going, and the legislature thought it was, but we took it into account. And the absorption capacity, to an extent, we knew it. And then maybe we haven't paid attention enough, but we, for example, put a lot of reforms ex ante, front-loading the reform to try to implement. So we have changed the procurement process in some member states and so on. We've reinforced the administrative capacity and so on. This was done, but probably not, and that's one of the lessons, not enough. And the conjunction of having cohesion. And it's a lot of money, this is true. Money is needed, so that we are convinced. But it's challenging, and probably we underestimate, and I think member states underestimate a bit the amount of funding. But it's also important to say that it's a lessons learned. It's a new instrument. So, do you want me to? No, okay. So, okay.
I think Tito has to go because
okay. Otherwise, you will lose your plane. You will miss your plane. Okay.
We'll go over a little bit.
Okay, very good. Yeah. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. And on the question of Francesco, so what is it? Change the plan. So I think, we have changed the plan already once massively. It takes a lot of time. So, for our point of view, we say, no, you implement what you should implement. Now, of course, if this is not feasible, there is always ways to change it, and we can do targeted amendment. But changing the plan at this stage, then you cannot have it all. You cannot say that you have too much money or you don't have the time and then keep changing it, that you will never manage to implement it. So I think at some point you need to, and that was a bit the logic of the RF, and that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to simplify to the extent we can, but I mean, the regulation says a certain number of criteria. We're not going to be able to change them. So now we can look at the margin. We are looking at the margin after the midterm evaluation to see what could be changed at the margin, but there is not much scope, to be honest, because we also have our own auditor, which is the European Court of Auditor, who are auditing us. And if we start taking liberties in terms of saying, okay, I mean, we think it's met, but it's not, then we will have like the European Court of Auditor making that flash saying Commission has not just audited properly, has spent money unwisely, and they will be the first one, I can tell you, to put it online. So we have to be also careful on this. On the question of the Netherlands, I mean, yes, we are looking into the lessons for the remaining time to see whether we can adapt to some extent, but it will be limited. But clearly, there is also reflection starting now to see to what extent the RF has good lessons to be used for the future of the EU funding. Of course, we have time. The next MFF will be starting in 2028, but that needs to be prepared in advance. In 2025 already, we start having plans for the new MFF. So indeed, discussion have started internally to compare between the various DGs that are implementing fund to see what works well, what doesn't, and I think it's very, very sound, and we're going to make it. But clearly, one of the lessons is that, and that the other DG are also in, is that the using the funds that we have, the union funds for leveraging reform, has worked well in the context of the RF than, for example, in cohesion policy. And that's an important element. So we have managed much more in terms of implementation of reform. So that is a feature that we see positively. Now, how we were going to just implement that, this is another story. And then I'm certainly, nothing will happen before, at least publicly, before we have the election and we know who is going to lead the next commission. And then on the question of Lucio, I mean, yes, we had to do simulation in the beginning because we didn't know. We have indeed, as you know, assumed that 100% of the grant were a productive investment, and then that 50% of the amount of loan were productive investment. But we haven't taken into account the impact of the reform. No, and we are going to try to do it in the future, because this is also, even internally, our regulatory scrutiny board told us, yeah, but you don't have the evidence. And it's true, we don't have the evidence of the impact. We are 3 years after, so it's almost impossible. But we will, for example, try to refine a bit our estimation of what are the investment. Now that we know exactly which investment are being financed, we can maybe try to refine by type of investment, and some investment are indeed more enhancing the in terms of productivity than others. So we are going to try to do that just over time to try to refine our estimates. So most probably, yes, it's going to go downward compared to, but it depends if you, but we have two scenarios. We have a high productivity scenario, low productivity scenario. So if you take the high productivity at 100%, additionality, so probably will be a bit lower. But at the same time, we are also looking at measures to see to what extent the reforms have had an impact. And that we are going to do also studies on that. So, and if there are researchers in the room, they are very welcome to do also research on the impact of reform. It's very difficult. We have done that in the past. We have some estimate, but we will try also to incorporate to some extent more. So the idea is from now until the end of the facility, and probably 2028, build a wealth of evidence of the impact and try to see what has been the actual impact more granularly. But it's from an aggregate point of view, we will always need to rely on models, because it's impossible to do it otherwise. Let's see if we can make it more progress in some of our assumptions. And I think I can stop here.
Thank you very much. Laurent, would you like to add some closing remarks, responding any question or any remark?
Yes, Jolt, thanks a lot for that. I think what is very core, what is very important is the spirit of the RRF, which was not geared toward European integration, European good, public good, and I think this is what we miss in the plan, in the overall plan. I think with this plan, which was conceived in a way which was very country versus commission oriented, we missed the integration factor for the European economy. So the network, the infrastructures, this is underdeveloped in the plan. So if there was a learning to take for the next one, next financial program, it would be this one, to use the European fund to really leverage and develop common goods for the European economy. I think it's pretty much in the spirit of the Leta report, which came out yesterday or today. And I think, it's how we can move on as European and not as domestically oriented. Because there is a solidarity component in the RRF, we all know this. So it was not to reproduce what we have done in following the GFC and the sovereign debt crisis in the beginning of 2010. But still, so this was a quick win from the plan. We fostered the recovery, we shielded public investment, but we still miss the European dimension. So I have not seen a plan. There are not so many which are cross-border, like train infrastructure, electricity grid, hydrogen, a lot. I don't know what we call a lot.
So a few, no, but I agree.
A few
I agree
is a lot.
I mean, I think that it's true that it's important to realize also that it's very difficult to make cross-border project in a program where you have national funds. I mean, national envelope. And for example, if you ask a country like, I don't know, one country that to use this country to build a connection from the gas, to transport gas from one to the other, if he doesn't benefit from it, he would never use his own allocation to do it. So, so this is, and it's very complicated also to make in a performance-based logic to say, I'm going to condition the receipt of my money to, because if you do a common project, if one fails, you don't get the money as well. So they are constrained.
I agree, Geraldine. I'm not saying it's easy.
No, but
I'm
I
just
agree with
saying
you.
if you are in a position to allot the money from European grant to the national, if this is a situation on which you can leverage to force European integration. You see, when you give money, you are in a better position. But I'm not saying it's already very difficult. We see it to deliver under national plans. So of course, if you had to do in 6 months cross-border plans, it would have been a nightmare. So I agree, there is a reason for that. I perfectly agree. It's not so easy. It's easy to speak, but it's difficult to implement. But for the next one, for the learning, I think it makes sense to have a European dimension which is fostered in this kind of financing facility.
No, I agree. We have, and this is also one of the lessons. I haven't mentioned this, but this cross-border dimension. There are hydrogen quite a bit. There are these IPCI that are quite important in some elements. The trans-European networks of railways. We have in most plans we have one dimension like this, but they are of limited compared to the needs. So that's clear. The question is how to make sure that we foster that more with our funds. And they are constrained with it. I don't say that it's not possible, because you could think at additional incentive, and we're thinking about that for the next one to foster more cross-border, because this is a dimension that we recognize should have been picked up more.
Thank you very much. I think it's an excellent closing words that in the future we have to focus a lot on European public goods and cross-border investment issues. So my last task is to thank very, very much to Geraldine, Laurent, and Tito for your excellent and insightful discussions and presentations, and for all of you who were here, and also our online audience for following discussion and also asking sometimes quite difficult questions. So thank you so much. Thank you.